if you're listening to this, chances are you have felt that heavy, quiet ache of a relationship that just stopped working. Not because of some big dramatic fight necessarily, but because the connection just sort of faded out.
Right.
Whether it's a family member you haven't spoken to in years or a lifelong friend who calls you, you increasingly miss, that pain is real.
Yeah.
And when that distance sets in, the standard script our culture gives us is, well, it's brutal. It's a moral script.
It is, yeah.
We're immediately forced into this, court of judgment, and we're tasked with finding the answer to that agonizing question. Who failed whom? This traditional moral narrative, it's just exhausting. It assumes that proximity is always available and that if you just cared enough or, tried hard enough, the relationship would hold.
Right.
And when it doesn't, someone has to be the villain. Someone has to take the blame. Our mission in this deep dive is to fundamentally break free of that loop of blame and guilt. We've gathered sources from sociology, philosophy, communications theory that let us reorganize how you think about relational distance.
Yeah.
We're going to look at estrangement not as an ethical or emotional failure, but through the lens of, physics and geography. But first, I think we need to fully appreciate the weight of that moral trap we're trying to escape.
What's fascinating about our sources is just how clearly they identify this cultural default. When we talk about estrangement, we instinctively reach for moral language.
Yeah, words like
rejection, conflict, a lack of forgiveness, or betrayal. We treat distance as if it's inherently synonymous with an accusation.
With an accusation, yeah.
This really deep-seated belief is rooted in a specific assumption that the will to maintain connection is the only ingredient you need. So if the relationship is far away, the traditional narrative dictates that someone, somewhere, made a choice to be distant, failed to care enough, or actively refused to repair things. The entire focus just lands on motive and moral choices.
Which makes the distance itself feel like a heavy accusation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Directed towards someone, either you or the other person.
And that instantly, it politicizes the distance. It makes any attempt at stepping back feel like an act of aggression or cruelty, even if you're just doing it to survive.
Yes.
It leaves no room for just neutral realities.
Exactly. The pressure to maintain proximity becomes this moral imperative, regardless of the cost. If you fail to maintain contact, you're seen as deficient, lacking love, lacking effort, or lacking character.
And that's why the reframing we found in the source material is so revolutionary. It's quieter, and frankly, it's a lot harder to dramatize, but it's so much more freeing. The core idea is this. Estrangement is reframed not as a failure, but as a topology. It's a geometry. The sources gave us this one incredibly precise sentence that it completely changes the game. Are you ready for it?
I am.
Our lives no longer intersect at a distance close enough to sustain relation.
Wow.
Wait, though, isn't this dangerous? I mean, doesn't calling it geometry run the risk of intellectualizing real pain? It feels like we could be letting people off the hook for things like emotional neglect or
Genuine malice,
Yeah, how do we keep the human element in focus while adopting this, incredibly abstract language?
That's a crucial question, and the sources actually anticipate it. This topological view doesn't eliminate accountability where, true malice or neglect happened. It just isolates those instances. For the vast majority of relationships that simply fade, it offers a functional alternative. The focus shifts entirely away from motive and morality, and it's placed instead on space, range, and material conditions that make contact possible or impossible. We're not looking for a verdict, a judgment against someone's character. We're looking for a description of the current shape of the system.
Right.
We acknowledge that two lives move, each with their own unique constraints and velocity and trajectory. And sometimes those trajectories just diverge to a point where they no longer pass close enough for the signal to hold.
So it's an acknowledgement of physical material limits on a connection.
It is.
So we stop asking, are we good people? And we start asking, what is the geometry of our two separate lives right now? And what are the constraints limiting our bandwidth?
That's precisely the pivot. And this is where that specific terminology from the source's distance, bandwidth, proximity, and routing becomes so vital. It turns these abstract relationship struggles into a systems analysis, which is inherently less emotionally charged.
Okay, let's unpack these terms because they sound like they're lifted straight from a network engineer's manual. So what exactly is the core mechanical insight here when we talk about relational bandwidth?
The insight is that love or care is essentially a signal. It's the information we transmit, the emotional, cognitive, and practical effort we send out.
Okay.
So the question is not whether that love exists in the abstract, but whether your two lives still run close enough and share a clean enough channel for that love to travel without distortion.
Without distortion. That's key.
You need a shared channel through which care can move and be received. Think of it like a satellite dish. If the dish is pointed slightly wrong, or if a major storm, a material condition intervenes, it doesn't matter how high definition the broadcast is.
Right.
The image you get is scrambled, intermittent, or just static-filled. The love is there, but the relationship system just can't successfully route it.
That's incredibly relatable.
Yeah.
It means that endless frustration we feel, that feeling that we're trying so hard but our efforts just aren't landing, isn't necessarily a function of being unloved,
No.
but of having a broken connection path.
Exactly. When you're operating at extremely low bandwidth, even small attempts at connection, like a simple text message, require massive amounts of energy just to cut through the static.
And the message gets warped.
It gets misinterpreted or attenuated, yes.
And the sources are very clear about the factors that actively reduce this bandwidth. We're talking about the material conditions that thin out that shared channel. And we need to go beyond the obvious ones here, because this is where the geometry really defines the relationship.
Yes. The list is so powerful because it externalizes the cause.
So what are they?
Let's start with geography. This is the obvious one, but it's deeper than just being in different cities.
Right.
Geography defines logistics. I mean, if one person lives in a city where every social interaction requires 90 minutes of commuting and complex planning, and the other lives somewhere people can just drop by spontaneously.
Oh, yeah.
The sheer friction created by geography can thin the channel immensely, even with the strongest will.
Then there's economics. This one is fascinating because it's not just about money. It's about the different realities that money creates.
Exactly. If one person experiences a major divergence in net worth, their entire conversational landscape changes. Their interests diverge from, say, budgeting to investing.
From renting to homeownership, from taking public transit to flying private.
And suddenly, that shared channel of common experience is gone. You can't genuinely connect about their daily life if their daily life is materially impossible for you, and vice versa. It just removes the shared context you need for intimacy.
So you're left with just abstraction.
Yes. Next, consider energy. This is the finite amount of physical, emotional, and mental resource a person has to give. Think about someone who becomes a single parent or starts a 70-hour-a-week job compared to a friend who is retired and volunteering.
Their bandwidth just tanks.
Their available relational bandwidth drops to near zero, not because they love you less, but because their entire energy budget is being spent somewhere else. The channel thins because of resource depletion.
And crucially, that's not a moral failure. It's a physical constraint. They literally do not have the battery life to sustain that connection.
Precisely, and that ties directly into time. We all have the same 24 hours, but the availability of uninterrupted quality time is governed by these other factors. If the only time you can connect is a hurried 10-minute phone call while one of you is driving...
That just severely limits the depth.
Right, the routing is limited.
But the material condition that really, I think, seals the deal is sheer accumulated divergence. This isn't one dramatic event.
No, it's quiet.
It's the quiet accumulation of differing life vectors. One person becomes devoted to deep ecology, the other goes into oil and gas. One converts to a new religion, the other doubles down on atheism.
These are not minor arguments. These are fundamental shifts in the operating system of two different lives. And the space between those operating systems, the divergence, it becomes so vast that translation just isn't possible anymore. You stop being able to inhabit the same conversation.
And that leads us to the crucial difference between the moral narrative's expectations and the topological reality. Rupture versus attenuation.
Yes. In the traditional moral narrative, we're conditioned to expect a rupture. Rupture is high drama. The door slam, the argument, the cutoff.
The clear moment of betrayal.
The clear moment. We look for that dramatic break because it justifies the moral verdict. But when estrangement is driven by these accumulating material conditions, the geography, the economics, the divergence, the system doesn't rupture violently. Instead, it simply attenuates.
So attenuation is the slow fade. Can you give us a concrete example of what that feels like from a relational perspective?
Attenuation is when the conversation goes from being about shared life plans to being about the weather. It's when a text message exchange takes days or weeks. It's when you finally meet up and the interaction feels like you're both shouting over static.
Needing to constantly explain context that was once just assumed.
Exactly. The signal is still there, but it's faint, it's distorted, and it gets harder and harder to sustain until eventually the channel just goes silent because maintaining it requires too much corrective effort.
The relationship isn't destroyed by a fight. It simply becomes structurally unsustainable because the distance grew too large for the available bandwidth to cross. That makes so much sense.
It does.
Which brings us back to the practical and ethical implications. If the distance is a geometry, not a personal failing, then fighting to maintain that close proximity through sheer willpower, it often becomes a source of pain and self-erasure. So if the geometry is unsustainable, what is the action we should take?
If the geometry can't be changed, fighting it only leads to chronic distortion and eventually potential rupture. The source introduces the concept of pressing pause as an ethic of distance.
Pressing pause.
Pressing pause is the act of recognizing the current geometry is hostile to connection and consciously stepping back to a sustainable distance, not a punitive one.
A protective one.
It's a protective measure, exactly.
That requires immense self-awareness, though, and honesty. How do you signal a pause? It's hard to just say, sorry, our topological divergence is too high right now.
It's challenging, but it requires substituting judgment with observation. A pause is signaled by defining sustainable boundaries that reduce friction without demanding moral surrender.
So
It might mean saying, I recognize that neither of us has the time or energy for a weekly call right now, but I want you to know I still care, and I will commit to a short check-in every quarter.
It acknowledges the current limit on your energy and time, those material conditions, and sets a realistic routing for the limited bandwidth you actually have.
Exactly. The purpose is to protect coherence, your own life's ability to function and thrive without forcing a rupture or grievance or self-erasure. If a relationship requires you to violate your own energy budget just to keep up appearances,
you're choosing moral proximity over material coherence.
Yes. Pressing pause acknowledges the material limits on connection while preserving the integrity of the love that might still exist.
This reframing also offers a huge emotional relief. It allows you to feel the sadness of the loss without demanding that you also feel the guilt of the failure.
That distinction is paramount. This topological analysis is not emotional flattening. The sadness remains. Grief over a changed or ended relationship is a genuine, felt loss in the body.
Of course.
The goal isn't to eliminate the feeling, but to reorganize the narrative around the feeling. We stop punishing ourselves or others for what is essentially a physical, material reality that neither person entirely controls.
The shift from who failed whom to distance, bandwidth, and routing, that can change everything about how you carry that specific type of relational grief. It gives you a vocabulary that's neutral and accurate and functional, replacing the language that is purely punitive and deeply personal. So for you, sitting with this information, the primary takeaway is the permission this framework grants. The permission to accept the geometry of your life and the permission to press pause. And in doing that, you preserve whatever core truth or care remains without demanding a level of proximity and bandwidth that simply no longer exists in the material world.
It is the profound power of renaming distance as geometry. It liberates you from the assumption that every single relationship must succeed at close range, regardless of the diverging velocities or economic pressures or energy constraints of the two people involved.
It's just an honest assessment of the system.
It is. And we'll leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. If estrangement is merely topology, what accumulated divergence in your own life, maybe a new career, a new city, a fundamental shift in values, is currently thinning a crucial channel? And how might pressing pause on the expectation of close proximity rather than fighting for it be the very thing that preserves the essential attenuated love that is struggling to travel? Something to explore on your own until our next deep dive.